Okay guys, so today's video, I saw this video and I was like, what does this even mean? You know, I was really surprised, but I really want to hear what Gone Girl London has got to say. Okay, today's video is from Gone Girl London and it's titled Americans Fall for Cults Much Easier Than Brits. Here's why. What's she talking about? Is she talking about cultism, cults, like cult groups? What's she talking about? We're going to find out today. Before we dive into the video, I'm Oge. Welcome to the channel. If it's your first time here, so happy to have you here. Do well to like, share, subscribe, turn on your post notification bell. Let's really check this out together.
Cults. 6 people have been missing for months, and police now believe they've been lured into an online cult.
Oh, cult.
Let's be done with it. Let's be done with the agony of it.
After 10 years of living in the UK, there's a noticeable lack of them here. But back in America, they are seemingly everywhere. And that made me wonder, are Americans more susceptible to cults? In this episode, I'm diving deep into American versus British attitudes towards cults to help explain why Americans seem to fall for them much more easily. But before we talk about the numbers of cults in each country or the different cultural attitude towards them, let's define what a cult actually is.
Okay.
Because there's a difference between a cult and something that's cult-ish. A cult is a group with a particular and often dangerously fanatical ideology.
Okay.
The word cult comes from cultus, meaning worship. Which is why having a charismatic leader is often an important part of a cult. The recipe of a cult, if you will. There's nothing to follow if there's no leader. Some people argue that all religions are cults, depending on the definition you use, and certainly some religions follow this much more closely, but other characteristics of cults are things like secret knowledge, so you're not publishing your full beliefs openly, and you're relying on secret knowledge between members. Then there's things like toxic behaviors, as well as a degree of authoritarianism from the cult leader. In today's context, if you go to a Church of England service every Sunday and bake bread for the local neighbors and try to fundraise for homeless charities, and you are free to discuss your questions about doctrine and differing beliefs without being shunned, you're part of a religion, or you are religious. On the other hand, if you're part of a group that forces you to shave your head and says that they know the ultimate answer to your salvation as long as you pay increasing amounts of money to gain access to it, and you are banned from communicating with people outside of this group, congratulations, you're in a cult. And then some things are cult adjacent or cult-ish. They don't fit the cult criteria, but the members act brainwashed or unable to consider other options or are overly committed to something. Some people joke, or maybe they're serious, that there's a cult around something like Apple products, for instance, or CrossFit. And then, of course, there are plenty of political cults and things like life coaching opportunities that could be seen as a cult. But I wanted to discover why it seems so much more prevalent in the US than in the UK, and on researching just how many cults each country has, I was right. The US is considered to have over 10,000 cults, so plenty of choice if you feel like being in a cult is your calling. On the other hand, the UK has only around 2,000, which is a disappointment for those of you who wish to dedicate your lives to a toxic leader who will never have your best interests at heart. Now, part of it is the size of the country. It's obviously going to be easier to have more cults with more people, but there's more to it. Americans just seem to fall in love with cults. There's a podcast I love called Was I in a Cult?, which has enough content to fill multiple seasons. It features people who have left modern-day cults, like Nixum, a self-help organization that turned into a cult featuring a guru called Keith who is linked to suspected sex trafficking. The women in the cult were branded with his initials, so that's all you need to know about how crazy it is. Then you have your classic cult, Scientology, as well as things like the 12 Tribes, a religious cult that believe that in order for the Messiah to return, they need to create a new Israel, which consists of 12 tribes located in 12 geographic regions. They also own a chain of restaurants in the US, Yellow Deli, which has this iconic review: good food, bad cult. And then, of course, in the US, you have historic cults like Jonestown or the People's Temple, which was led by a man named Jim Jones, which ended up with over 900 people dying from cyanide poisoning on the instruction of Jim Jones from drinking laced Kool-Aid. It's where the phrase "don't drink the Kool-Aid" comes from. On the other side of the pond, you have UK cults, which are admittedly harder to find, and my internet search history is really weird right now, you guys. They do exist though. Scientology does exist within the UK. Then you have something like the Universal Church of the Kingdom of God, another religious cult that has ties in the UK. However, the craziness of American cults, like Heaven's Gate, for instance, a cult that believed they needed to leave this earth by their own hand at the same time as a passing comet so they could hop on board the UFO that was behind it, that's harder to find in the UK. But why? And I know that it's easy to just say, especially if you're British, well, Americans are crazy, and we're not. But there's more to it. First of all, as I've discussed multiple times before, America is a much more religious country than the UK. Historically, this makes sense. The original European settlers of the US were religious groups like the Puritans, and a history of immigration means that a lot of immigrants brought their religious views with them, including Catholicism and Judaism, and that religion often helps them stay connected and feeling to their homeland. And when I say Americans are more religious, I mean actively participating in religion, rather than just saying you're a Christian because you occasionally show up to the Christmas Carol service at the local church. You can define yourself however you want, but the definition of what I'm saying as religious is not that. In the US, over 40% of Americans are in church at least once a month, with a solid 20% attending every single week. In the UK, this is about 5% of the population. And so why does this matter if we're not saying that all religions are cults? So Americans are more religious. Does that necessarily mean they're more culty? Well, yes, in some ways. A quote on Reddit sums it up. It might seem very unusual in some countries, I guess, for someone to declare themselves a preacher and start drawing a congregation of their own. But that's not unusual at all in the US. So there's going to be that tiny number of them that will actually be fronts for wannabe cult leaders. And it can't be denied that in many religions you follow. That's the whole point. Who you're following varies based on the religion, but if you're already primed to show up each week at church to follow this religious leader, it can make people more susceptible to following a cult leader. In America, we are used to this idea of a charismatic person standing on a stage to preach and telling us how to better our lives. And hopefully, and I'm not saying religion is a bad thing, hopefully it stops at that person standing on a stage telling you to love your neighbor and go feed the homeless and have faith in something outside of yourself. But sometimes it doesn't, and people are not necessarily primed to question it when it goes further and into cult territory until it's too late and you find yourself in a cult. In the UK, it may be easier for people to not fall into the trap of cults because there's already a lack of religiousness and the tendency to be okay with following in that sense. Next, you've got some practical reasons why Americans seem to love cults while Brits seem to give them the side eye. Some cults focus on things like salvation of your soul, which is outside of the remit of, like the NHS, but a lack of institutional support within the US is another factor in cults compared to the UK. So in places like the UK and other advanced nations, there is what is known as top-down resources, like universal healthcare, more support for those struggling financially, council housing, etc. America is much more of a free-for-all. It's a great place to be rich and a very bad place to be poor or have health issues or be struggling because you don't have the institutional safety net like other countries do. And often cults will prey on this, not necessarily to give you healthcare or whatever it is, but to help you. Smaller cults might be more like communes where you can come live with them free of charge. Another type of cult is an MLM, standing for multi-level marketing. These are hugely popular in the US, and yes, they are still around, but less so in the UK. 99.6% of people in MLMs will make little to no money, with many of them losing money, but they sell the idea of making money and guilt people into staying because the people at the top are making money off of everyone below, and they're telling you to ignore your friends and family who are warning you that this isn't a good business idea and to basically cut you off from the rest of your community and to find that community within the MLM so you don't realize you're being scammed. Pretty cultish, but more Americans will fall for this because think about it. People who don't have that institutional safety net in life from a practical perspective are going to be much more willing to try anything they can to make money to make sure they don't end up homeless or without the ability to pay for their healthcare costs than someone who does have a ground level of support from their country and government, that there are going to be more options for them if they fall on hard times. People don't usually join cults out of a fascination with wanting to hop on board a UFO to see if they can ride a comet to the next life. Often, they join out of desperation. And to my next point, sometimes people join out of loneliness or a need for connection. But don't people in the UK need connection too, you might point out? Well, yes. And the UK is also an individualistic society like the USA when we compare them to countries like Japan or China. That being said, America is one of the most individualistic societies in the entire world. American culture is influenced by stories of pioneers, individualists who were making do for themselves in a harsh land. And in some ways, this type of society can lead to good things. Americans are much less likely to follow the grain when it comes to business ideas or innovation or the status quo, which means it's a great place for entrepreneurship, but it's also a great place for cults, which seems to contradict itself because why would people in an individualistic society need a community? Surely they are taught to only think about yourself. The thing is, no matter where you're born, humans are human and we need connection. So while the UK is individualistic as well, it's a bit less so than in the US. There is still an overall shared consciousness of things like the wars that meant that people had to band together and take collective action to survive. Even during the pandemic, you saw this in the UK versus the USA. The British were more likely to do their part and try and stay home, to not put too much strain on the NHS, and to feel that they were in it together. On the other hand, many Americans were annoyed from day one that someone was trying to tell them what to do. So while the UK has a little bit more in the way of feeling part of a collective, in America we don't. We even make sure that everyone knows how much power each individual state has when compared to the country as a whole. America is fragmented and individualistic, and thus people only define connection somewhere. Often they find it in religion. It is very common in the US for your main social group and connection to be through your church or religious group. But unfortunately, many times people find it in cults that promise that sense of belonging and protection from the constant stress of an individualistic society. And finally, to have a cult, you need a cult leader, and a cult leader usually needs to be charismatic, a good speaker, and sweet talking in some way. That's what gets people on their side and to trust them. And culturally, America helps people develop these skills. America is very much a performance-based society. I am not suggesting that in the UK, children and young adults do not learn about public speaking or have to do it in school, but in America, we really lean hard into it. Over and over again in school, we were always doing performance-based activities, constant presentations, and marks for how well we present, project, and how clear we are to understand. We see this as a sign of confidence and competence, and we are really celebrated for it at an early age. Many of us also have to participate in a lot of extracurricular activities, as we call them, in order to be admitted to university. The system and what they look for is different than in the US. So we're all in things like debate club, or as a personal example, I was vice president of the Spanish Honor Society in high school, which was sort of something you joined if you had good grades in Spanish and wanted it to look good for college. But I had to give a speech at the age of 16 in Spanish to an auditorium of parents and students. Often, the confidence that people see when I am presenting is funny to me, because I am actually not somebody who is at the head of a social group or the one talking the most or the loudest at any sort of social event. I'm usually in the corner eating snacks to try and avoid it all. But when it comes to presenting and public speaking and entertaining and informing in this way, I am confident because I learned how to be within the system I grew up in. But instead of starting a cult, I decided to start a YouTube channel, so I would like to think I'm using my powers for good rather than evil. And so there you have it. Perhaps you can apply these learnings to recent events, that's up to you, but I hope this helped break down why those in the US seem a lot more willing to sign up for what seems like crazy and incredibly fringe movements, whereas those in the UK seem a lot less interested and mainly want to be left alone to tend to their gardens or go to the pub or meet up with friends to do non-culty activities. Thanks very much for watching. Please don't join a cult, and I'll see you next time.
Now we can see why there are more cults in America than in the US and in the UK. I'm also having, whenever you see most of these cultish things or cults, they are mostly religious. Like, they are mostly religious, and I'm only beginning to realize that America is more religious than the UK. No wonder, right? No wonder. I mean, she gave a lot of reasons. She gave a lot, I think about 5 reasons why Americans fall for cults than they have more cults in America than the UK. Of course, that's one of the reasons why, people would join more in the US than in the UK, because there are more cults. So there are so many, there are different types, just different types. But I'm just wondering why, because if you see a lot of I don't know them. To be honest, I'm hearing all of this for the first time. But I know that a lot of cult groups are mostly religious groups, or they stem out from religious groups, you understand? And I'm just realizing that, I'm just realizing this is so interesting. If you know, like, other reasons why Americans, fall for cults than, why Americans fall for cult groups much easier than the UK, please let us know in the comment section. Why do you think, apart from the reason she said Americans are more religious than the British people. She mentioned that she mentioned a few reasons. And I feel like they are actually valid reasons. That if you think about it, you see why Americans will fall more, because I'm sure she has done a lot of research to back up these things. I'm just like shocked and surprised, to be honest. One would think that, like she mentioned, one would think that, Americans are crazy, they are more liberal and all of those things. But if you look at it in a deeper level, you will understand what she's trying to say. Let's know in the comment section some other reasons why you think that Americans fall for cults than the British people. And she mentioned something that was very, very important as well. She said people don't willingly want to join cults, that they join cults groups out of desperation and out of loneliness. And then she also mentioned something along the line of that the Americans are more lonely than the Brits. Because these are reasons why people will want to join, because they want like a safe space, they want people of like minds, they want, understand what I mean? Yeah. So here are some of the reasons. If you have more other reasons, please let us know in the comment section, just to understand these things better. Do well to like this video if you enjoyed it. Drop in the comment section all you think about this video, additions, subtractions. If you don't agree with a certain thing she said, please let us know, understand these things better, because I'm just here, I'm watching this for the first time and I'm surprised. I'm learning a lot as well, because I didn't know about all of this. I didn't even know that cult groups were more in the US, to be honest, because I know that we have cult group, but looking at it now, it only makes sense. It's actually true. It only makes sense, and the statistics is so, like, the difference is so much, like over 10,000 cult groups in the US compared to about 2,000 plus cult groups in the UK. That's a lot of difference. So they have more in the US than the UK. And she gave reasons. If you have more reasons, please let us know in the comment section below. Do well to like, share, subscribe, turn on post notification bell, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye bye.